It was on a dreary November morning, the kind where the mist rolled heavily along Baker Street and even the cab horses seemed reluctant to stir, that I first became aware of the curious affair of the misplaced ring. I had scarcely finished my tea when Mrs. Hudson announced the arrival of Inspector Lestrade, whose expression carried that familiar mixture of frustration and reluctant appeal which I had seen so often when Scotland Yard found itself at an impasse. "Holmes," said Lestrade, once he had been ushered into our sitting-room, "this case will confound the cleverest of us, and I should be a fool not to place it before you." He glanced about uneasily, then lowered his voice. "A gentleman of high standing has been found dead in his private chambers at the Clarendon Club. The circumstances, I assure you, are as baffling as they are delicate." Holmes, who had been sprawled across the settee with his violin resting idly upon his knee, regarded our visitor with the faintest glimmer of interest. "Pray continue, Lestrade. I trust it is not merely another society scandal dressed in melodrama. You spoke of peculiar circumstances." "Precisely that," Lestrade replied, producing a small velvet pouch. From it he withdrew a gold ring, plain in design but gleaming with an almost insolent brilliance. This was discovered upon the victim's left hand, yet every associate, friend, and even his valet insists he always wore his signet upon his right. The dead man could scarcely have exchanged it himself in his final moments, for his body bore signs of sudden collapse, poison perhaps, or some other unseen cause. And so the question arises, who placed the ring upon the wrong hand, and why? I could not help but lean forward, for the details struck me as odd indeed. To the common observer, such a discrepancy might appear trivial, but I knew from long experience at Holmes's side that it was in such trivialities that truth was most often concealed. Holmes, however, smiled faintly and tapped his long fingers against the violin's neck. "A man is found dead in a locked chamber, his ring adorning the hand opposite to that upon which he invariably wore it. Scotland Yard, I presume, attributes the matter to carelessness or superstition. I, however, perceive a thread, thin but strong enough to guide us through the labyrinth." Lestrade shifted impatiently. "Then you will take it on, Holmes. The Yard is under pressure to resolve this quickly. The gentleman in question was a member of Parliament, and certain circles already whisper of foul play." Holmes rose briskly, his eyes now alight with the unmistakable fire of intellectual pursuit. "Watson, your coat. It appears our morning is to be spent at the Clarendon Club. I should like to view the body before some well-meaning official has disturbed the evidence. The matter of the misplaced ring is but the overture. The symphony, I suspect, has scarcely begun. And thus, with scarcely more than that odd trinket to guide us, we were drawn into one of the most singular and intricate investigations it has ever been my lot to chronicle." The morning fog still clung to the air as our cab rattled down Pall Mall, its wheels splashing through the shallow pools of rain that lingered along the curb. I confess that the details Lestrade had imparted weighed upon my thoughts more heavily than the dreary weather. A signet ring upon the wrong hand. Such a trifling matter, one might say. Yet in Holmes's world it was often in trifles that the truth lay concealed. As we drew nearer to the Clarendon Club, that fortress of mahogany and polished brass, where London's distinguished gentlemen gathered beyond the prying eyes of the public, I could not shake the impression that we were about to intrude upon a scene at once delicate and dangerous. Holmes, seated opposite me, was silent for much of the journey, his keen grey eyes half closed as if in reverie. I knew better, however, than to mistake that stillness for idleness. His long fingers drummed now and again upon the polished handle of his cane, marking some rhythm known only to himself. When at last he spoke, it was not to Lestrade, but to me. "You observed, Watson, the inspector's phrasing. He said the ring was discovered upon the left hand, whereas all witnesses swore it was customarily worn upon the right. Why do you suppose he was so precise?" "Because the discrepancy is unusual," I ventured, "and it suggests interference, that someone must have placed it there." Holmes's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "Indeed, my dear fellow. Yet you leap too boldly to conclusions. A discrepancy may hint at interference, but it may equally hint at intention, ritual, or the vanity of habit. What matters is not that the ring is upon the wrong hand, but that someone deemed it necessary. It should be so. That, I think, will prove our compass." Lestrade, who had been glowering at the passing streets, broke in irritably. "Compass or no compass, Holmes, I should be obliged if you would give some plain thought to the matter at hand." The man was Sir Reginald Farnsworth, member for St. Albans, respected by most, envied by many. His politics made enemies, to be sure, but he was scarcely the sort to fall prey to scandal. The coroner suspects poison, but the substance is yet unidentified. As for the ring, well, you can attach whatever significance you like to it, but I dare say the jury will care more for the cause of death than the finger on which a bauble rested. Holmes regarded him with cool amusement. "And yet, Lestrade, it is precisely by the bauble that the cause may be revealed. The mind that dismisses trifles blinds itself to truth. A corpse, after all, is but the conclusion. The ring is a sentence within the preface." We drew up then before the Clarendon Club, whose stone facade, wreathed in mist, bore a certain gravity suited to the calamity within. The porter, grave-faced and discreet, ushered us through to a side passage, anxious to avoid the eyes of the members lingering in the drawing-rooms. The hush of the place was broken only by the creak of boots upon marble and the muffled click of a distant billiard ball. It was as though the institution itself conspired to keep secrets. At last we entered the chamber where the body lay. It was a handsome room, fitted with dark panelling, a Turkish rug, and a writing desk littered with correspondence. There, in a high-backed chair near the hearth, Sir Reginald's form sat slumped, his head thrown back, his complexion pale as parchment. His right hand drooped to the side, fingers loosely curled. His left rested upon his lap, the gold ring gleaming upon the wrong finger as Lestrade had described. Holmes moved at once with the peculiar energy he displayed only in moments of discovery. His eyes darted over the body, the room, the desk. He stooped, inspected a glass upon the table, lifted it to his nose, and replaced it. He crouched to examine the position of the feet, then the faint smear upon the rug beneath. To Lestrade's evident discomfort, Holmes even bent close to the lips of the deceased, sniffing delicately as if testing for some lingering trace. "Well, Watson," he asked suddenly, straightening, "what do you observe?" I felt the weight of his scrutiny and forced myself to take in the details as best I could. The man appears to have died in his chair without struggle. The glass upon the table suggests drink. Perhaps the poison was introduced there. His complexion is pale, but not contorted, so it may have been a swift-acting agent. As for the ring, it sits too loosely on that finger, as if it were not meant for it. Holmes inclined his head slightly, as though conceding some merit. A sound catalogue of the obvious. But let us sharpen it. You remark that the ring is loose. Therefore, had it always been worn upon that finger, it would long since have slipped off. Its presence is not natural, but contrived. As for the glass, do you note the faint line upon the rim? Lip rouge, my dear Watson, though Sir Reginald was never accused of that indulgence. Someone else drank from that vessel, either before or after his demise. Lestrade snorted. "Rouge! You'll have the coroner believing the poor gentleman was murdered by a chorus girl if you go on in that vein." Holmes ignored him, pacing now about the desk. He fingered the correspondence scattered there, lifting one envelope after another, studying the seals. He paused at a sheet half-written, the pen laid across it as though abandoned mid-thought. "A letter," he murmured. "Addressed, but not finished. Curious. The hand is steady, the ink scarcely dried. He was interrupted, and not long before his death. He passed the page to me, and I read the words. My dear Charles, matters have reached a point where silence is no longer possible. Tonight I—" The line ended abruptly, followed by a blot where the pen had hesitated. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Mark that, Watson. He intended a revelation, but was forestalled. To whom was the letter addressed? Charles, I repeated, scanning the page. No surname is given. Then Charles must be of intimate connection, close enough not to require further formality. We shall learn more of him, no doubt. At that moment, the club's secretary entered, a man of middle years with severe whiskers and a nervous air. He introduced himself as Mr. Pelham and expressed deep distress over the tragedy. Holmes drew him gently into conversation, inquiring after Sir Reginald's habits, his acquaintances, his temperament. From Pelham we learned that Sir Reginald had dined alone in his chamber the previous evening, declining company. He was last seen alive around 9 o'clock, when a waiter brought up a tray. The body had been discovered at dawn by the valet, who had roused the club in alarm. Was anything unusual observed? Holmes pressed. Strangers loitering, unusual callers, disturbances? Pelham hesitated. There was, well, it may be nothing. A lady was seen leaving by the side entrance shortly after 10. We assumed she had been visiting one of the members. She was veiled, and the porter did not inquire further. Holmes's brows rose. A lady in a gentleman's club unaccounted for? My dear sir, that is never nothing. He turned to Lestrade, who looked thunderstruck. We must find this lady, Inspector, for she may hold the thread of our labyrinth, and when we do, I fancy the question of the ring will begin to answer itself. Lestrade shifted uneasily. If it comes to scandal, Holmes, the Yard will not thank you for making it worse. Holmes gave a short laugh. Better the scandal of truth than the scandal of ignorance, Lestrade. Now, Watson, attend closely. There is a sequence here. An unfinished letter, a glass marked by another's lips, and a ring upon the wrong hand. Together, they compose the opening of our symphony. The melody, I assure you, will not be gentle. Holmes remained crouched upon the carpet for some minutes, his sharp gaze moving inch by inch across the expanse as though he sought to read a cryptic text laid out in fibers and dust. I could hear Lestrade shifting impatiently behind me, his boots creaking with the restlessness of a man who feels himself useless, yet dare not depart. The stillness in the room was broken only by the occasional snap of the fire in the hearth, and the scratching of my pencil as I recorded my observations. At last, Holmes straightened, brushing his long fingers together, and fixed his gaze upon a narrow strip of rug just beside the chair. "Watson," he said quietly, "you possess a steady eye and a surgeon's memory. Tell me what you see here." I bent where he indicated. At first the carpet appeared unremarkable, an intricate Persian weave in tones of crimson and deep blue. Yet upon closer examination, I detected a faint discoloration, a darker blot that had spread unevenly into the threads. "A stain," I said, "though not of wine or ink. Perhaps water?" Holmes shook his head. "Observe the outline. It is irregular, not circular. A liquid was spilled, yes, but thickened. There are traces of crystalline residue at the edges. Sugar, my dear Watson. Something sweetened was spilled, though not from the glass on the table. That remains half full." Lestrade gave a gruff laugh. "Sugar? Is that your grand discovery, Holmes? You'll be telling us next the man died of pastry." Holmes ignored the barb. "A separate glass once stood here," he continued, "overturned in haste. Removed since then, no doubt, by one anxious to conceal its presence. And yet even the most careful hand cannot erase chemistry from the carpet. The faint odor you remarked, Watson, was not of spirits alone, but of cordial mixed with something acrid. A vehicle for poison, perhaps. But we must not leap ahead." He crossed to the writing desk once more and examined the half-finished letter. His long finger traced the blot where the pen had faltered. "Interrupted suddenly," he murmured, yet with no sign of struggle. A voluntary pause induced by a visitor. Who would command such abrupt attention, if not one whom Sir Reginald both trusted and feared? I could not resist an exclamation. You suggest that the mysterious lady was here, in this room, when he began his letter? Holmes turned, his eyes glittering in the dim light. Not merely here, Watson. She is the reason it was never finished. Lestrade muttered something under his breath, but made no attempt to interfere further, for Holmes was already moving with restless energy about the chamber. He paused at the mantel, ran a finger along its edge, and held it to the light. A faint trace of ash clung there, unlike the fine grey soot of the hearth. "Paper ash," he said with satisfaction. "Something was burned here within the last 12 hours. The fragments are gone, yet this smudge betrays them. A letter, perhaps, or a note too dangerous to be left whole." The inspector frowned. "You cannot know that, Holmes. It might have been nothing more than the end of a cigar." Holmes's smile was thin. If so, then Sir Reginald had acquired the peculiar habit of resting his cigars flat upon the mantel before lighting them. But no matter. Let us turn to the body itself. He bent once more over Sir Reginald's form. The pallor of the dead man seemed even more ghastly in the shifting firelight, and I confess a chill ran through me as I watched Holmes's lean hands move with the delicacy of a physician. He pressed gently at the jaw, peered into the eyes, and examined the fingernails. "Note, Watson, the absence of convulsion," he said. "The muscles are relaxed, the lips unstained. This was no violent draught of strychnine or prussic acid. Rather a subtler agent, something that steals the breath without twisting the frame. Digitalis, perhaps, or a preparation of aconite. But let us not speculate. We shall let science speak." He produced a small glass vial from his pocket and, with my assistance, took a scraping from the rim of the untouched glass on the table. Another from the stain upon the carpet. He sealed both carefully. "The laboratory will tell us more than the coroner's guesswork. Until then, we must be guided by logic." At that moment, the door opened, and the valet, a young man of neat appearance and anxious mien, was shown in by the secretary. His name, we learned, was Harris, and it was he who had discovered the body that morning. Holmes questioned him gently, but with an acuity that left no corner of his memory untouched. Harris described how he had entered at 7:30 with the breakfast tray, found his master unresponsive, and summoned help at once. He had noticed nothing amiss the evening before, save that Sir Reginald seemed preoccupied and had dismissed him earlier than usual. "Did your master wear his ring upon the left hand?" Holmes asked suddenly. The valet looked startled. "Never, sir. Always upon the right as long as I have known him. He prized it highly. It bore the Farnsworth crest. To see it upon the left is most strange." "Quite," said Holmes. "Did you observe any visitors last evening?" Harris hesitated, then coloured slightly. "Only one, sir. A lady, veiled, as Mr. Pelham may have told you. She arrived shortly after 9. I was instructed to admit her without question." "Describe her." "I can scarcely do so, sir. She was of middle height, slimly built, her veil was heavy, and she spoke little. I took her cloak. It was dark velvet, trimmed with sable. She remained with Sir Reginald for perhaps an hour. When she departed, he looked altered, as though some weight pressed upon him." Holmes's expression did not change, yet I could sense the quickening of his interest. "And you did not see her face?" "No, sir. Not once." Holmes nodded, dismissing the man with thanks. When the door had closed, he turned to Lestrade. "There you have it, Inspector. A visitor at the very hour the fatal events must have been set in motion. It is to her that our steps must now turn." Lestrade growled. "Easier said than done. London is not so small that one veiled lady in velvet may be found at the snap of a finger." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "On the contrary, Lestrade, a veiled lady entering a gentleman's club is not so common a spectacle. There will be traces, cabmen, shopkeepers, servants. The city itself records its movements if one has the wit to read them, and we shall read them." He fell silent then, lost in thought, and I knew better than to disturb him. His mind, once engaged, moved with such swiftness that to interject was to risk derailing a delicate mechanism. After some minutes he stirred, tapped the letter upon the desk, and spoke with sudden decision. "Watson, Lestrade, we have gleaned what we may from the scene. Further revelation must come from inquiry beyond these walls. I would ask, however, one final favor of you, Inspector. Ensure that this room remains undisturbed until I give word. No cleaning, no rearrangement. The smallest disorder may yet speak volumes." Lestrade grudgingly agreed, though his skepticism was plain. Holmes gathered his vials, adjusted his coat, and led us once more into the chill November air. As we stepped into the waiting cab, he cast a glance back at the sombre facade of the Clarendon Club. "There lies the prologue," he murmured, "but the play itself is about to begin." The fog hung heavier still as our cab carried us from the Clarendon Club toward Baker Street. I sat opposite Holmes, watching the dim outline of his face in the half-light that filtered through the grimy glass. He had not spoken a word since our departure, his gaze fixed upon some inner landscape invisible to me. I had long since learned not to interrupt him at such times, for when his mind ran upon a scent, every careless word might prove an obstacle. Lestrade, on the other hand, fidgeted beside me, plainly irritated at being drawn into silence. At length, Holmes stirred. "The case, gentlemen, pivots upon 3 points. First, the unfinished letter, proof that Sir Reginald stood on the threshold of a revelation. Second, the glass, which bore the trace of another's lips. Third, the ring upon the wrong hand. To these we must now add the mysterious visitor, a lady whose presence at a gentleman's club is an anomaly so striking that it cannot be brushed aside. Our task is to connect these strands into a fabric that reveals motive." "And your conclusion?" Lestrade demanded, his voice edged with skepticism. "That there exists a person who desired not merely Sir Reginald's silence, but also the impression of intimacy, a gesture marked by the transposition of his ring. Why one should stage such a detail is not yet clear. But you will find, Inspector, that affectation of symbolism is common among those whose crimes are driven by passion rather than gain." Lestrade gave a grunt of irritation. "So you suspect a woman, then?" "I suspect an intelligence capable of arranging trifles," Holmes replied calmly. "And whether that intelligence belongs to man or woman is not yet proven." By the time we reached Baker Street, the gloom of the afternoon had deepened into the premature twilight of a November evening. Holmes wasted no time upon rest or refreshment. He summoned young Wiggins and his band of street urchins, entrusting them with the task of tracing cabmen who might recall conveying a veiled lady in sable from Pall Mall on the previous night. "A shilling for each clue, 2 for certainty," he instructed crisply, before dismissing them into the night like so many hounds upon a scent. "Meanwhile," he said, turning to me, "we must pursue another avenue. You observed the unfinished letter, Watson. It was addressed to Charles. It is of the first importance to identify this Charles, for Sir Reginald clearly considered him confident enough to share a matter of grave significance. I've already dispatched a note to the clerk of the House of Commons. By tonight we shall have a list of those colleagues most intimately connected with him." True to his prediction, scarcely 2 hours later, a messenger arrived bearing a sheaf of papers. Holmes spread them upon the table, scanning swiftly. Among the names repeated most often in association with Sir Reginald was that of Charles Elworthy, a younger member of Parliament, ambitious, eloquent, and known to share many of Sir Reginald's political views. Elworthy, Holmes mused, an ally by profession, but what by inclination? It is he who receives a letter abruptly broken by death. If anyone can illuminate Sir Reginald's final hours, it is he. Watson, you and I shall call upon him at once. We found Mr. Elworthy in his chambers at Westminster, a tall, clean-shaven man of vigorous bearing whose restless movements betrayed the energy of youth not yet tempered by experience. He received us courteously enough, though with evident surprise when Holmes introduced himself. "I fear I can offer you little assistance," he said when the purpose of our visit was explained. "Sir Reginald and I were close in public life, it is true, but our private intercourse was infrequent. His death is a shock, but I cannot conceive why I should be dragged into the matter." Holmes regarded him steadily. "And yet, Mr. Elworthy, Sir Reginald died in the very act of writing to you." The young man's colour changed slightly, though his voice remained firm. "Writing to me? That is extraordinary. I had no knowledge of it." "Do you deny, then, that he was in possession of information he intended to share?" "I cannot deny what I did not know," Elworthy replied, a touch of irritation creeping into his tone. "If Sir Reginald sought to confide something, it must have been political in nature. Perhaps he wished to warn me of opposition or to enlist me in some measure, but he never breathed a word of it to me alive." Holmes's gaze never wavered. "And you were not in his company last night?" "Certainly not. I was dining with colleagues at the Reform Club until late. I can produce witnesses if you doubt me." Lestrade, who had accompanied us, muttered that such an alibi would be easily verified. Holmes, however, seemed less concerned with the denial itself than with the flicker of unease that crossed Elworthy's features when the subject of the letter was pressed. When we departed, I ventured to ask Holmes whether he suspected the young parliamentarian. "He bears watching," Holmes replied. "Note, Watson, how quickly he leapt to politics as the subject of the letter. Too quickly, perhaps. And yet I do not think he is our poisoner. His vanity is too transparent, his ambition too open. A man like Elworthy schemes with speeches, not with powders." By the following morning, Holmes's irregular agents returned with tidings. A cabman recalled conveying a veiled lady in sable from Pall Mall to Grosvenor Square shortly after 10 o'clock on the fatal night. She had paid well and spoken little, but he remembered her voice, refined though tremulous. "Grosvenor Square," Holmes repeated thoughtfully. "The quarter of wealth and discretion. It narrows our field, Watson. Now, who among Sir Reginald's acquaintances resides there?" It was Lestrade, ironically, who supplied the answer. "Lady Clara Farnsworth, his wife's cousin, a widow of some means. She has a house in Grosvenor Square and is known to have been on terms of, shall we say, peculiar intimacy with Sir Reginald." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Ah, Lestrade, you redeem yourself. A lady of close connection, moving in secrecy, leaving by the side entrance of a club. And what better explanation for the transposed ring than the hand of one who knew him well, perhaps too well? Come, Watson, let us call upon Lady Clara without delay." The residence in Grosvenor Square proved elegant but subdued, the sort of house whose windows glowed warmly, yet revealed nothing of the life within. Lady Clara received us in a drawing-room draped with rich curtains, her figure slender, her face pale beneath a cloud of chestnut hair. She greeted Holmes with composure, though I fancied I detected a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "You come concerning poor Sir Reginald," she said softly. "It is a dreadful tragedy. I scarcely slept last night for the shock of it." Holmes bowed. "We do not doubt your grief, Lady Clara. Yet you will forgive me if I speak plainly. You were seen at the Clarendon Club last night." Her hands trembled slightly upon the arm of her chair. "Seen? At the club? That is impossible." "Nevertheless," Holmes said evenly, "the evidence is clear. You arrived veiled and departed around 10. The porter, the valet, and a cabman are unanimous." For an instant she seemed on the verge of denial, then her composure failed and she bowed her head. "Very well, I did go, but only to warn him. There were rumors abroad, scandalous rumors that threatened both his career and mine. I begged him to end our association, for tongues were wagging. That is all." "And the ring?" Holmes asked sharply. She looked up, startled. "The ring? Sir Reginald's signet was found upon his left hand, though all knew he wore it on the right." A shadow passed over her face. I know nothing of that. Truly." Her denial was fervent, yet I could not rid myself of the conviction that some deeper knowledge lurked behind her troubled gaze. Holmes, for his part, did not press her further. He merely rose, thanked her for her candor, and withdrew. Once outside, Lestrade could not contain himself. "Well, Holmes, that settles it. She admits being there, she had motive to silence him, and she tampered with the ring as a symbol of their intimacy. It's as good as done." Holmes's smile was cold. "On the contrary, Inspector, it is far too good. Too neat. The truth, I fancy, lies tangled beneath this convenient arrangement. And until we unpick it, we remain in darkness." The cab bore us away once more through the fog, the case now grown darker rather than clearer. And though Lestrade congratulated himself upon a solution at hand, I could see in Holmes's eyes that the real mystery had only deepened. Holmes did not share Lestrade's satisfaction when we left Lady Clara. As we rode back to Baker Street, he remained silent, eyes fixed on some private calculation. When at last we entered our rooms, he went straight to the desk, spread out the notes we had gathered, and said quietly, "It is too neat, Watson. Lady Clara's visit, her nervous confession, the rumor of intimacy, these are not discoveries but distractions." I protested that her admission of visiting Sir Reginald on the very night of his death was damning enough. Holmes shook his head. "She admits to what cannot be denied, but when pressed on the ring, her astonishment was genuine. Someone wants the world to believe she is guilty. That makes her, in my eyes, less likely the culprit." He unlocked a drawer and drew out a scorched scrap of paper. This I retrieved from the fireplace at the Clarendon Club. The hand that tried to burn it overlooked a fragment. "Look here." I bent over it and read, "Not Clara. It is—" The rest was lost to the flames. "Good heavens!" I cried. Then Sir Reginald intended to warn Elworthy of some danger, expressly clearing Lady Clara. "Exactly. The murderer burned the letter, but failed to destroy it all. That one phrase topples the Yard's case." Holmes slipped the scrap into an envelope with deliberate care. "This is our real clue. Lady Clara was not the threat he feared." Without pausing, he turned to the vial we had brought from the club. In the morning light, he performed a series of tests with his usual precision. I assisted where I could, though my medical training was less suited to chemistry than to diagnosis. After half an hour, he straightened, eyes shining. "Aconitine," he declared, "a deadly alkaloid from Monkshood. Swift, subtle, leaving no violent signs. Exactly as I suspected." "Then Sir Reginald was poisoned," I said. "Beyond doubt. And note, Watson. The cordial spilled upon the carpet was sweetened. That second glass held the poison. He was not alone when he drank it." I recalled the unfinished letter. "Then whoever interrupted him offered the fatal draught?" Holmes nodded. "Yes, he trusted them enough to drink at their side. That trust killed him." Just then, a knock at the door announced Wiggins, who reported that the veiled lady had been driven from Pall Mall to Grosvenor Square at 10 o'clock. The address matched Lady Clara's, confirming her visit, but Holmes dismissed it with a wave. "What matters is not where she went," he said, "but who else was moving in Sir Reginald's shadow. And for that we return to the letter he wrote to Charles. Who else but Elworthy would he confide in? Yet the fragment points beyond him, not Clara. Who else did he mean? We called again upon Elworthy that same day. He received us with visible unease. Holmes wasted no time. "Mr. Elworthy, Sir Reginald died while writing to you. The fragment we recovered makes it plain he meant to warn you, not of Lady Clara, but of another." "Who was this other?" Elworthy paled. "You found part of the letter. Then you know." He hesitated, then went on. "There was one man Sir Reginald often called my namesake, Charles Percival, a financier. His schemes were dubious, his methods ruthless. Sir Reginald despised him, and I suspect Percival bore him no love in return. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Percival, yes. That name has the ring of truth. Where is he to be found? At his offices in the city, near Threadneedle Street. We left Elworthy shaken and returned to the cab. I could not help asking, "Do you believe this Percival guilty?" Holmes tapped the envelope with the scorched scrap. "The clue points away from Lady Clara and toward another Charles. Percival had motive if Sir Reginald opposed him. He had means, for financiers know well the uses of chemistry, and he has concealment, for no one yet has mentioned his name in connection with the affair." He looked out into the London fog, his profile sharp against the window. "Yes, Watson, the threads tighten, but the question remains. Why the ring? Until we solve that, we grasp only the edges of the design." I saw then that for Holmes the game had shifted. Lady Clara was no longer at the heart of the matter. A new adversary, unseen but already formidable, had stepped into the shadows of the case. Charles Percival. The name of Charles Percival remained with us like a shadow as we made our way into the city the following morning. Holmes, his coat buttoned tightly against the cold, strode with the long, purposeful step that meant his thoughts were already 3 moves ahead. I had seen him in this mood before. Keen, unsparing, intent upon some hidden junction where truth and deception crossed paths. Threadneedle Street was already alive with the bustle of clerks and messengers when we arrived at Percival's offices. The building was a tall stone affair, its brass plate proclaiming Charles Percival and Company, Investments and Trusts. Inside, we found a suite of rooms luxuriously furnished, but the man himself was absent. A secretary, all starch and spectacles, informed us that Mr. Percival had left unexpectedly that morning and was not expected until late afternoon. Holmes questioned the man briefly, though it yielded little. Percival, it seemed, kept irregular hours. His dealings were varied, his reputation whispered about in the markets, but never proven in the courts. "A clever fox," Holmes murmured as we stepped back into the street. "He knows how to leave no tracks, but every fox must return to its den." We arranged to return later, but fate intervened before the hour arrived. As we lunched near the bank, Lestrade burst in, his face pale with suppressed excitement. "Holmes, Watson, you'll want to hear this. Percival's clerk just reported it to the yard. The man himself has been found, dead in his own chambers." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Dead? How?" "Poison," Lestrade said grimly, "and if you ask me, this ties the knot neatly." He silenced Farnsworth, and someone silenced him in turn. "The case is closed on the first at least." Holmes rose instantly. "Closed? My dear Lestrade, it has scarcely begun. Come, every moment we delay risks the loss of some vital trace." We hastened to Percival's chambers, not far from the offices we had just quitted. The scene bore an uncanny resemblance to that at the Clarendon Club. Percival lay slumped in an armchair, his complexion ghastly pale, his features relaxed in that same unnatural repose. Upon the table before him stood a half-empty glass and a decanter. Papers lay scattered about as though abandoned mid-perusal. Holmes bent at once to examine the body. After a moment he straightened, his expression grave. "The same hand, Watson. The same method. Aconitine beyond doubt. But note the refinement. Here no ring is moved, no letter half-burned. The message is different. What is it, Lestrade, when the first crime is arranged with symbols and the second stripped bare?" Lestrade scowled. "It tells me Percival was guilty of the first, and someone has taken justice into their own hands." Holmes shook his head. "Or it tells us that Percival was never guilty, and his death serves only to mislead us further. The ring was a contrivance. This is a counter-contrivance. We are not unraveling a thread, Inspector. We are watching a web being woven about us." He examined the table with his lens, lingering upon the glass. "Yes, the same powdery residue at the rim. And here, Watson, observe the indentation upon the carpet near his feet. A visitor sat opposite him, though the chair has since been drawn away. He did not drink alone. From the scattered papers, Holmes retrieved one, a letter addressed in Sir Reginald's hand. The envelope was unsealed, the sheet half-read. It was a copy of a parliamentary motion concerning railway expansion. Dry, political, unremarkable. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Why should Percival have this? And why, having read half, was it abandoned? No, Watson. Something was inserted and removed. Look at the crease here, the faint trace of ink. Another sheet lay upon this, pressed into the fibers. The hand that brought poison also took away the true document. We searched further, but found nothing more. At length Holmes rose, his face set. This alters everything. 2 men dead by the same subtle hand, one discredited by a ring upon the wrong finger, the other silenced before he could speak. The pattern is no longer one of passion, but of design. There is intelligence behind this, Watson, cold and deliberate. On our way back to Baker Street, I ventured to ask whether Holmes believed Lady Clara now entirely innocent. Innocent of the poison, yes, he replied, but not innocent of secrecy. She knows more than she confesses, and her silence serves another's end. Whether by fear or loyalty, she shields someone. Who? That is the question. When we reached our rooms, Holmes summoned Wiggins once more. Find out all you can of Percival's associates, he instructed. Not the public ones, but those who came by night, who owed him favors or feared his debts. There lies our quarry. As the boy departed, Holmes turned to me. Consider the facts, Watson. Sir Reginald dies, his ring transposed, his letter destroyed, but leaving a fragment. Not Clara. Percival dies the next day in similar manner, without symbol or flourish. What does it mean? I confessed myself baffled. It suggests, perhaps, that Percival killed Farnsworth and then someone else killed Percival in turn. A tempting theory, but too simple, Holmes replied. Why, if Percival were guilty, should his death omit the theatrical touches that marked the first? The contrast is the clue. 2 deaths, 2 methods of arrangement. It is the difference that points to the hand behind both. He broke off suddenly and began to laugh softly. Watson, we stand upon the edge of revelation. Do you not see? The unfinished letter, the scorched scrap, the ring, the cordial, all fit together. Yet one piece eludes us. Until it falls into place, we grope in twilight. Before I could reply, a knock came at the door. It was Wiggins again, breathless with haste. Mr. Holmes, sir, I done what you asked. Percival was seen yesterday evening with a gentleman, tall, dark, well-dressed. Met him outside the offices and went off together. Some say it was a foreigner. They spoke in low voices. No one knows his name. Holmes's eyes lit up. Excellent, Wiggins. That, I think, is the missing figure. A stranger who binds the 2 deaths together. He turned to me, his voice taut with urgency. Watson, we have no time to lose. The stakes have risen. This game is no longer about jealousy or scandal. It is about something far greater, and the hand that plays it is cunning indeed. I followed him into the fog once more, my mind reeling with the quick succession of revelations. 2 men dead, a lady's honor at stake, and now a foreign stranger moving unseen through London streets. Whatever this web concealed, I felt certain it was about to ensnare us all. For 2 days after Percival's death, Holmes was a man possessed. He scarcely, slept but fitfully, and when he did speak, it was in sharp fragments of thought that seemed only half directed at me. The scraps of evidence, the scorched paper, the glass, the ring, and now the stranger's shadow, were fitted and refitted in his restless mind like pieces of a great puzzle whose outline was only now emerging. Watson, he said abruptly one evening, we are not contending with random murder, but with orchestration. 2 men silenced in succession. Both deaths served not personal spite, but purpose. We must identify that purpose, and the architect behind it. And how will you accomplish that? I asked. By compelling the architect to reveal himself, it is time to change from hunter to bait. He opened a drawer and drew out one of the many disguises with which he so often astonished me. This time it was the garb of a disheveled clerk. Frayed cuffs, ink-stained fingers, and a wig of thinning hair. Within moments, Sherlock Holmes, the consulting detective, had vanished, replaced by a shabby figure who might have been overlooked in any crowd. "Watson," he said, adjusting his spectacles, "you will accompany me, but as yourself. We must visit certain haunts in the city, for it is there that gossip runs quickest. A foreign gentleman of striking appearance was seen with Percival. If he is still in London, I shall find him." That night we made our way through the bustling taverns and coffee houses frequented by clerks and stock jobbers. Holmes, bent beneath his wig, moved among them with a furtive air, murmuring questions, buying drinks, and passing for one of their own. I followed at a distance, pretending to be his employer. By midnight he had gathered fragments. Mention of a tall foreigner with a heavy moustache, an accent described as German or perhaps Austrian, and an appointment said to have taken place near the docks. "The docks," Holmes muttered when we returned to Baker Street. "There, Watson, lies our thread. Commerce and crime go hand in hand, and in the warehouses of the river many a secret bargain is struck. Tomorrow we shall pay a visit." The following afternoon found us in Limehouse, among warehouses whose timbers loomed black against the mist. The air was heavy with the scent of tar and salt, and the cries of sailors echoed from the river. Holmes, still in his disguise, moved with purpose until we reached a small office wedged between two wharves. The sign read H. Gruner & Co., shipping agents. Inside, a clerk eyed us suspiciously. Holmes, in his assumed character, stammered about seeking employment. While the man fetched a form, Holmes's sharp gaze swept the room. His eyes lingered on a rack of ledgers, thick volumes marked with shipping manifests. When we left, he whispered, "Note the name, Watson, Gruner. A front, no doubt. I've encountered it before in connection with dubious continental syndicates. Our foreigner hides in such places." That evening he laid his plan before me. "We must flush this man into the open. If we wait, he may vanish into the continent, leaving us with nothing but corpses and conjecture. Therefore, we set a snare. Tomorrow you will attend a meeting at Elworthy's chambers. I shall contrive that word reaches our quarry that Sir Reginald's unfinished letter has been recovered in full. Nothing tempts a murderer so much as the threat of exposure." "But Holmes," I protested, "if you spread such a rumor, will it not place Elworthy in peril?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "That is precisely why I shall be near at hand. The spider will creep toward what he believes his fly, but it is I who hold the web." The following day passed with nervous anticipation. Elworthy, though clearly uneasy, consented to Holmes's plan. He sat at his desk, papers arranged before him, while I occupied a chair nearby, revolver discreetly in my pocket at Holmes's insistence. Holmes himself had vanished, promising only that he would be close enough to strike. Hours dragged. The clock on the mantel ticked heavily. Then, as twilight deepened, there came a soft knock at the door. Elworthy called for the visitor to enter. A tall man stepped in, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a heavy moustache and a foreign cast of countenance. His eyes swept the room quickly, pausing an instant upon the desk. "You are Mr. Elworthy?" he asked in a low voice, his accent thick. "I am," Elworthy replied, striving for calm. "I hear you have a letter from your late friend. I should like to see it." I tensed, hand upon my revolver. Elworthy faltered, I have no such letter." The stranger advanced a step, his hand sliding inside his coat. That is unfortunate. Yet I think you have. Better to give it to me willingly than to—" He broke off with a start, for at that moment the door behind him swung open, and in stepped a shabby clerk, spectacles glinting. But as the man threw aside his wig and bent posture, there stood revealed the sharp, hawk-like features of Sherlock Holmes. Better to what, sir? Holmes said coolly. Commit a third murder? I think not. The stranger's hand darted for a pistol, but Holmes was quicker. With a sudden spring, he knocked the weapon aside, and in the struggle that followed, I leapt forward, seizing the man's arm. Elworthy cried out as the table overturned, scattering papers. Within moments, the foreigner was subdued, his pistol wrenched away, his wrists secured with Holmes's handkerchief. Breathing hard, Holmes regarded him with contempt. You will forgive the theatrics, Watson, but I judged our friend would not show his hand without a little prompting. And now, sir, we shall hear precisely who you are and why you chose to deal death by aconitine in London drawing-rooms. The man glared sullenly, lips pressed tight. Holmes gave a thin smile. Very well. You may hold your tongue for the yard, but not for long. The pattern is clear, and I have all I need. You fancied yourself unseen, but you left your mark in every symbol you arranged. The ring, the cordial, the burned letter, all your handiwork, and now you are caught. He turned to me with a look of fierce triumph. The web tightens, Watson. We have our spider. It was close upon midnight when we conveyed our prisoner back to Baker Street. Lestrade, summoned hastily from the yard, joined us there, red-faced and bristling with questions. The foreigner sat bound in Holmes's armchair, his mustache bristling, his lips curled in defiance. He had refused to give his name, but his eyes, dark, cold, and intelligent, missed nothing. Holmes, composed as ever, stood before the hearth with his back to the fire. He clasped his hands behind him and fixed the company with that penetrating gaze which seemed to draw the very marrow from a man's bones. Inspector, he said quietly, before you rush to the conclusion that you have secured an ordinary criminal, let us put the facts in order. Only when the entire chain is visible will you appreciate the design that lies beneath. Lestrade folded his arms, plainly skeptical but willing to listen. Very well, Holmes. Let's hear your theory. Holmes inclined his head. Not theory, Lestrade. Demonstration. The death of Sir Reginald Farnsworth appeared at first to be a matter of scandal. A lady's secret visit, an unfinished letter, a ring upon the wrong hand. But let us ask, who benefited from this arrangement? Lady Clara, supposedly guilty, was placed in the glare of suspicion. Percival, a financier of dubious reputation, was hinted at in the shadows. But both were diversions. The true architect stood outside, watching us chase illusions. He gestured toward the prisoner. This man, whose true name I believe is Heinrich Vogel, has long been employed by certain continental syndicates that prey upon English finance and politics alike. His task was to silence Sir Reginald, who had uncovered evidence of fraudulent schemes threatening to ruin investors. Percival was entangled in those schemes. By eliminating both Farnsworth and Percival, Vogel removed not only an accuser but also a dangerous accomplice who might talk under pressure. The prisoner's eyes narrowed, though he said nothing. Holmes continued, now to the symbols. Sir Reginald's ring, placed upon the wrong hand, was no random fancy. It was a signal, a message to draw suspicion toward the sphere of domestic scandal. Vogel understood that the yard would seize upon the simplest interpretation, a jealous woman, an intimacy betrayed. And so Lady Clara was maneuvered into the light. She was seen entering, she admitted as much, and the ring became a silent accusation. Too perfect, Watson, too convenient. I nodded, recalling Holmes's words at the time. And the cordial upon the carpet? Ah, yes. The cordial was the instrument. The second glass contained aconitine, masked with sweetness. Sir Reginald trusted. His visitor drank and died swiftly. Vogel removed the evidence but overlooked the faint stain, which told me another glass had stood there. The ring was his flourish, his attempt to add a dramatic touch. But symbols betray the symbolist. Lady Clara was innocent of poison, precisely because the arrangement pointed too directly at her. Lestrade grunted. Then Percival. Why was he killed? Because he was the weak link. Percival was a man of greed, not courage. Sir Reginald despised him, and Vogel's employers feared he might talk. After Farnsworth's death, Percival became a liability. He knew too much of the syndicate's dealings, too little discretion. And so he was silenced in the same manner, but notice the difference. His death lacked flourish. No ring, no burned letter. Why? Because it was not meant to distract, only to remove. Vogel's hand was more careless the second time. He thought the pattern would confuse us, when in fact the contrast revealed his presence. Holmes turned sharply toward our captive. "You blundered, sir, in burning Farnsworth's letter. You left a fragment that read, 'Not Clara.' That phrase was enough. Had you destroyed it utterly, your illusion might have endured. But you left behind the whisper of truth, and truth, however faint, has a way of being heard." I could not help but ask, "And the foreign stranger reported at the docks?" "That was Vogel." Holmes inclined his head. "Precisely. He used the shipping offices as his base under the name Gruner. There he could vanish among ledgers and manifests, arranging his exits at a moment's notice. But greed, or arrogance, held him in London long enough for us to spread the rumor of the recovered letter. He could not resist the risk. He came hunting what he thought was proof against him and walked into our snare." Lestrade rubbed his chin, struggling to take it all in. "And you're certain, Holmes? Certain it's him, not Percival or the lady?" Holmes's voice hardened. "Lestrade, consider. 2 deaths by the same rare poison delivered by cordial. Percival could scarcely poison himself, nor could Lady Clara acquire and use aconitine without leaving traces. Only an outsider, versed in both chemistry and conspiracy, could manage such subtlety. Vogel's presence with Percival was witnessed. His attempt to recover the letter brought him to Elworthy's chambers, and the pistol in his pocket leaves no doubt of his intent. Do you require further proof?" For a long moment, silence hung in the room. Then Lestrade exhaled and gave a reluctant nod. "Very well, Holmes. I'll have him taken to the yard. But by heaven, you've outstripped us once again. Without that scrap of paper, we should all have sworn Lady Clara was the guilty one." Holmes allowed himself the faintest smile. "It is ever so, Inspector. The smallest fragment, the overlooked trifle. That is where truth hides. Our friend Vogel knew how to weave a web, but he forgot that even the finest thread may gleam when struck by the right light." At this, the prisoner finally spoke. His voice was low, guttural, each word heavy with disdain. "You may have me, Mr. Holmes, but you have nothing of my master's. You have cut one thread, but the web remains. There are others, cleverer than I, who will finish what has been begun." Holmes regarded him coolly. "Then I pity them, for they too shall find Baker Street is not so easily deceived." The man subsided into silence, and Lestrade called for a constable to escort him away. As the door closed behind them, I turned to Holmes. "It is astonishing, Holmes. From a ring upon the wrong hand, you have drawn a line to continental conspirators and unmasked a murderer." Holmes shrugged lightly. "A line that was always there, Watson, if only one had eyes to see it. The ring was never mere ornament. It was a symbol, a false beacon. Once I recognized it as such, the rest followed." He moved to the window, gazing out upon the lamplit street. "But make no mistake, this is not an end, but an episode. Vogel was but an instrument. The hand that moved him remains unseen. Whether we shall ever glimpse it, I cannot say." I felt a chill at his words, for though the case seemed solved, the sense of a deeper menace lingered. Holmes, however, only lit his pipe and sank back into his chair with the calm of a man who has, for the moment, played his part to perfection. The following morning dawned bleak and wet, London's streets awash with rain and the rumble of carriages muffled by the mist. Yet within Baker Street, the air was electric with the knowledge that justice, at least in part, had been served. Heinrich Vogel, as Holmes had rightly named him, sat in custody at Scotland Yard. Lestrade, though reluctant to admit it, had grudgingly confessed that without Holmes's intervention, the affair might well have ended with Lady Clara's condemned in the court of public opinion. Indeed, Lady Clara was the first matter Holmes addressed that day. "It would be unjust," he said, pacing before the fire, "to allow rumour to destroy a woman whose only crime was indiscretion. Watson, you must accompany me to Grosvenor Square. She deserves the truth, however bitter it may be." We found Lady Clara in a state of near collapse, her nerves frayed by 2 days of speculation and fear. She received us in her drawing-room, her eyes ringed with fatigue. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, "I've heard that someone has been arrested. Does this mean—" Holmes inclined his head. "You are no longer in danger, Lady Clara. The poisoner was not you nor Percival, but an agent of foreign interests who sought to silence Sir Reginald for reasons of politics and finance. You were used, madam, as a veil of convenience. Your visit to him, innocent though it was of malice, gave the villain all the material he needed to construct a false trail." Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped her hands together. "I feared the world would believe me guilty. I cared for Sir Reginald once, perhaps too much, but I never wished him harm." Holmes' expression softened slightly, though his voice remained cool. "Your secrecy was ill-judged, Lady Clara, but your conscience is clear. Be cautious in future where confidences are concerned. Society is swift to judge and slower to forgive." She thanked him with a trembling voice, and we departed. As we made our way back through the rain, I ventured to remark that Holmes had been unusually gentle. He gave a short laugh. "Not gentle, Watson. Merely just. The world is cruel enough without my adding to its weight. And besides, she is no villain, only a woman caught in the snares of a cleverer mind." At the yard, Lestrade was waiting with his customary air of official bustle. "Well, Holmes, your man Vogel has been tight-lipped as a clam, but his pockets yielded letters in cipher, and his lodgings contained powders enough to fell an army. That'll be evidence aplenty for the courts. I'll not deny it. Your methods have a way of cutting through fog." Holmes inclined his head slightly, but there was no triumph in his expression. "The fog, Inspector, remains. Vogel was but the hand, not the brain. His talk of masters was no idle boast. I fear we have glimpsed only a corner of a larger design." Lestrade waved this aside. "Perhaps so, but one step at a time. The papers are already clamoring for the story. Farnsworth's death is explained, Percival's guilt disproved, and the lady's name cleared. That is enough for the public." Holmes's lips curved in that sardonic smile I knew so well. "Ah, the public. Ever eager for resolution, never patient with ambiguity? Very well, give them their story, but remember, Inspector, that truth is rarely so tidy. If another death follows, remember Vogel's words." Lestrade muttered something about Holmes's taste for the dramatic, but he made no further protest. That evening, Holmes and I sat once more before our own hearth, the case now officially closed in the eyes of Scotland Yard. I could not help reflecting aloud upon the strangeness of it all, that a single ring, shifted from one hand to another, should have drawn us into a conspiracy stretching across borders. Holmes smiled faintly. "It is always the small thing, Watson. The ring was intended to distract, yet it betrayed. The scrap of paper, overlooked in a grate, spoke louder than all the speeches in Parliament. A sugar stain on a carpet revealed the second glass. Great crimes are undone not by great blunders, but by trifles." I made a note of this remark in my journal, for it struck me as one of Holmes's most characteristic aphorisms. Yet I could not resist adding, "And yet, Holmes, there is something unsatisfying in the conclusion. We have the murderer, yes, but not the mind behind him. Who were his masters? What was the object of silencing Farnsworth?" Holmes's gaze grew distant. He tapped the ash from his pipe and said quietly, "You are correct, Watson. The web remains unseen. Farnsworth had uncovered something, some fraud, some scheme that threatened powerful men. Vogel was dispatched to silence him, Percival along with him. But the greater hand remains invisible. Perhaps it is better so. Were we to draw that veil, we might find ourselves facing forces not easily overcome. He fell into silence, and I did not disturb him. The next morning brought a visit from Charles Elworthy, whose relief was palpable when we confirmed Lady Clara's innocence and Vogel's guilt. "I am indebted to you, Mr. Holmes," he said earnestly. "Without you, my name would have been dragged into scandal, and perhaps my life endangered as well." Holmes waved this aside. "Guard your ambitions, Mr. Elworthy. Politics is a stage where the lines between ally and enemy blur most swiftly. Farnsworth died for what he sought to reveal. Take care that you do not tread the same path unwittingly." Elworthy colored, murmured thanks, and departed. Later that day, as we sat in our rooms, Holmes remarked, "There is an irony, Watson. The public will remember this as the case of Lady Clara, the scandalous visitor. They will never know of Vogel, nor of the shadowy cabal that moved him. But perhaps it is better that way. Truth, when it unsettles too deeply, is often unwelcome." For my part, I could not help but feel that the case, though outwardly solved, had left behind more unease than satisfaction. Vogel was gone, but his words echoed still. "You have cut one thread, but the web remains." Holmes, however, showed no such disquiet. That night, after hours of silence, he set aside his violin and remarked, almost casually, "Watson, you have recorded the facts faithfully, but do not dwell too much upon their shadows. The world is full of riddles, and we cannot solve them all. It is enough that we have solved this one." With that he retired, leaving me to my thoughts, which were far less tranquil than his own. For I could not shake the conviction that somewhere in the fog of London unseen eyes still watched, and that the case of the ring found on the wrong hand was not the end, but merely a chapter in a far larger mystery. A week had passed since the arrest of Heinrich Vogel, and the city had already turned its restless attention to newer scandals. The newspapers, fed by Lestrade's carefully measured statements, presented the matter as the unmasking of a foreign agent who had sought to meddle in English finance. Sir Reginald's death was explained, Lady Clara's name cleared, and Percival dismissed as a victim of his own shady dealings. It was a story simple enough for public digestion, and few cared to look deeper. Yet within the walls of Baker Street, Holmes regarded the case with an expression of unfinished business. His violin lay untouched, his pipe often cold in his hand. He read the papers with sardonic amusement and tossed them aside. "See how neatly they tie it up, Watson," he remarked one morning, "as though the truth were a parcel wrapped with string. The public is content to believe that Vogel acted alone, a solitary criminal. But Vogel himself told us otherwise. He was a hand moved by a greater brain. That brain remains in shadow." I attempted to reassure him. "But surely, Holmes, we have done all that could be expected. We have prevented Lady Clara's ruin, restored Elworthy's reputation, and delivered a murderer to justice. One cannot hope to uproot every tendril of conspiracy." Holmes gave a thin smile. "Perhaps not. Yet I confess to a certain dissatisfaction. I prefer to see the full picture, not merely its outline. Vogel's employers will not forgive his capture. Whether in London or abroad, they will weave again. It is their nature." Nevertheless, time brought its own rhythm back to Baker Street. Clients came and went, the fire burned cheerfully in the grate, and Mrs. Hudson's clatter in the kitchen provided its familiar background music. The case of the ring found on the wrong hand began to settle into memory, though I continued to ponder its curious chain of events. One evening, as we sat together in rare leisure, I ventured to ask the question that had long troubled me. "Holmes, there is one thing I cannot understand. Why the ring? If Vogel wished to conceal his crime, why tamper with so trivial an object? Surely it risked more than it gained." Holmes leaned back, his eyes half closed, and a faint smile played about his lips. "Ah, Watson, that is the essence of it. Criminals, like dramatists, cannot resist a flourish." The ring was Vogel's touch of artistry. By moving it to the wrong hand, he sought to stamp the crime with a false significance. He intended us to read it as a lover's gesture, a token of intimacy, thereby fastening suspicion upon Lady Clara. It was clever, but too clever. For once we recognized it as contrivance, the whole illusion crumbled. He paused, then added, "Remember this, Watson. The truest clue is often the one that seems most trivial. A scrap of paper, a stain upon a carpet, a ring upon the wrong hand. The world dismisses such things, but to the trained eye they are the alphabet of truth." I made a note of the remark, for it struck me as one of his guiding principles. A few days later we received a letter from Lady Clara, written in a hand steadier than when last we saw her. She expressed her gratitude for Holmes's intervention and her determination to withdraw from society for a time. "The scandal has wounded me," she wrote, "but thanks to you, it has not destroyed me." Holmes read the letter with no comment, then tucked it into the drawer with other curious relics of past cases. Charles Elworthy, too, sent word of his thanks, though Holmes treated it with cool indifference. "He will rise swiftly now," he observed. "Politics is fertile soil for the ambitious when rivals are removed. Let us hope he learns wisdom from Farnsworth's fate, though I confess I doubt it." As for Vogel, his silence endured. The Yard held him on charges sufficient to secure conviction, yet no further names escaped his lips. Holmes speculated that he feared his own masters more than the gallows. "There is loyalty in the underworld, Watson," he said grimly, "but it is born of terror, not devotion." It was on the 7th evening after Vogel's arrest that Holmes, having smoked long in silence, rose and stood by the window. Outside, the fog swirled once more, cloaking the lamps in halos of yellow. "Watson," he said quietly, "have you ever considered how fragile truth is? A man dies, a ring lies upon the wrong hand, a paper burns in a grate. From such fragments we must build a structure of certainty. And yet, how easily it might have been otherwise. One more twist of the villain's hand, one more thoroughness in his destruction of evidence, and the truth would have slipped forever into the fog." I responded that it was his genius which prevented such outcomes. He gave a short laugh. "Genius, perhaps, or obstinacy. I cannot abide illusion. Where others are content with appearances, I must press until reality yields. It is less a gift than a compulsion." We fell into silence then, broken only by the ticking of the clock. At last, Holmes turned back into the room, his features softened by reflection. "You will set it down in your notes, Watson, as the case of the ring found on the wrong hand." And so it was. But to me, it shall always be a reminder that the smallest gesture, the movement of a ring, the stain of sugar upon a carpet, can overturn the mightiest schemes. Remember that when you write it, for therein lies its true lesson. With that, he took up his violin and drew from it a soft, contemplative melody that seemed to mingle with the fog beyond the window. I sat listening, filled with the familiar mixture of admiration and wonder. For once again, Sherlock Holmes had looked upon the commonplace and discerned within it the extraordinary, turning the faintest whisper of a clue into the voice of truth. And so ended the strange affair of Sir Reginald Farnsworth, of Charles Percival, of Lady Clara and Heinrich Vogel, the case of the ring found on the wrong hand.